Are we starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel? And who could possibly be against peace between Russia and Ukraine? Let's talk about it, y'all. Middle America.
And you ain't black. I don't know what I said.
The first time ever any...
What are you people?
We're Americans. We are Americans indeed. My name is Vincent, and this, dear listener, is Middle America, where we are not left-wing, we are not right-wing, we are just right. I'm just kidding. Kind of. All right, guys. Happy Thursday to all you beautiful people. Guys, we have been covering the invasion of Ukraine, the special operation into Ukraine, depending on which propaganda outlet you have been listening to. And today, we've got some really good news. Shout out to King Yeti. Shout out to Random Matt. Shout out to Clarissa. We've got some really, really good news that we're going to be able to talk about with you guys. Let me know if my mic levels are good. I felt like I was a little bit low yesterday. I'm still experimenting with making sure that our volume is where it needs to be. All right, guys. So we've got some really, really good content for you guys on the way. Sit back and relax. We've got 2 videos to review and some things to talk about and discuss. Shout out to River Roth who took part in one of our debates yesterday. It was an amazing debate. All the participants did very, very well, articulated their points very well. And we were able to show that you can disagree agreeably about this and come to a humanitarian conclusion. God willing, we'll have more of those as we go along. Now, today, we will be reviewing some episodes from Breaking Points. I mistakenly and erroneously called it Rising, in which one of our Middle Americans was kind enough to correct me on immediately, which is what I love, actually, because that's what we're supposed to do. Because you're supposed to change based on the information you're given at the time. I'm a very, very big believer in that. And hopefully you are too, dear listener, because if we don't, we're going to be in a lot of trouble and a world of hurt. In my opinion, that's been part of our problem as a nation. But that's a different topic for another day, I suppose we could say. Okay. Here we go. This is Breaking Points. I think this episode was today, actually. As you could see on the scrolling ticker up there, guys. If Salam Alek, Ya Ibn Israfel. You can see up there, you guys all know about the YouTube throttling. You guys know what YouTube does with certain media outlets that they don't deem as factual and all the rest of it, because we've covered that as well on Middle America. A lot of you guys have said you guys don't get the notifications when we go live. So what you can do is unsubscribe, resubscribe, and hit the bell. Okay, the moment has arrived. Here we go. This is Rising today, and it says details, Russia, Ukraine, etc. Let's do it.
Let's get to the diplomatic section of this. So let's go ahead and put this next one up there on the screen, which is that while all of this call for a no-fly zone and arms is happening in English and in Washington, in Ukraine and in their relations with Russia, there's a little bit of a different tack. So Ukrainian President Zelensky says that Ukraine will not become a member of NATO. Instead, he calls for new formats of interactions with the West and security guarantees. That obviously is a huge development, especially if you pair it with some significant progress in the peace talks. Let's go ahead and put this next one up there on the screen, which is that while all of this call for a no-fly zone and arms is happening in English and in Washington.
Yes, dear listener, we covered that yesterday. Tucker Carlson got into it with Representative Salazar, the one that was saying she was good with no-fly zone, even though she admitted she has Maria Elvira Salazar. She was a U.S. rep, even though she admitted that she had no idea what a no-fly zone would do and the ramifications of which. She said it was fine so long as we could punish Putin. This is the same Salazar who refused to even comment that it would be a good thing if the Ukrainians and the Russians were to come to a bloodless settling of this conflict, or a less bloody one. She wouldn't even say that that was good. She said it wasn't her place to say, but it was her place to say, apparently, that that the Russians, that Mr. Putin should be punished. Okay, we continue.
In Ukraine and in their relations with Russia, there's a little bit of a different tack. So Ukrainian President Zelensky says that Ukraine will not become a member of NATO. Instead, he calls for new formats of interactions with the West and security guarantees. That
is excellent. That's great. Draft a constitutional amendment that will state that Ukraine will not become a member of NATO. Excellent, Mr. Zelensky. Very, 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 very happy. My only question is, why did it take all this bloodshed to come to this conclusion? Why did it take so much bloodshed for Zelensky to finally say, you know what? Maybe we should not join a hostile alliance to Russia, considering we're a border country with Russia. But look, that's spilled milk. It's spilled blood at this point. It's a good decision. I hope you stay on it. Keep going, Mr. Zelensky. Finally, you could actually earn your Captain Ukraine thingamajig.
obviously is a huge development, especially if you pair it with some significant progress in the peace talks. Let's put this next one up there, please, which is that Zelensky's talks with Russia, he says, are starting to, quote, sound more realistic. He adds this caveat. However, time is still needed for the decisions to be in Ukraine's interests. Our heroes give us the time defending Ukraine everywhere. Now, if you add in Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister.
Okay, so our heroes, that's the military stuff, because you gotta give an overture to the right wing in your populace and go, yay, military. Chris says that the reason that it took all this bloodshed was because his people want otherwise, which, Chris, I don't know, Chris, if you understand this, but there are millions of Ukrainians who identify with Russia. They're in the Donbass region. They're also in the Odessa area. So in order for you to say that, you once again have to erase all the Russian folks that are in Ukraine, which Ukraine has attempted to do it on a multitude of occasions after their violent Nazi-led coup. You saw that they immediately went and deleted Russia as one of the two official languages from Ukraine. So the only way that a person could say that is if you erased all Russian folks from Ukraine. We continue.
Some more. He says, quote, there is hope for reaching a compromise with Ukraine at the peace talks, and says, quote, there are absolutely specific wordings that are close to being agreed, which is specifically on neutrality for Ukraine and security guarantees for Russia. So we have brought you previously kind of, if the best case scenario, here's how it would go. The Kremlin said that they're pursuing demilitarization. They could claim through their military.
The Kremlin is seeking demilitarization. Correct. And this is part of the debate that we had yesterday as to what that means. I don't think that means that the Ukrainians are completely stripped of any ability to defend themselves. Rather, it's the NATO implications of having an unlimited resource of weapons and capital by which to do damage to Russia. We continue.
Campaign. We've demilitarized Ukraine. We have destroyed their defense industrial base. On the Ukrainian side, they have to recognize Crimea. They have to recognize the DNR, the LHR, those breakaway Eastern republics.
That would be Donbass. People said, what are your solutions, Vin? And I said they've got to stop offensive measures against Russia. You've got to draft a resolution to get out of NATO and stay out of NATO and never be in NATO. You've got to give up Crimea, and you've got to recognize Donbass. Those are the four things. And it looks like, hey, Vladimir, Mr. Zelensky has been watching Middle America with VIN and SORI. I'm messing with you. We continue.
And they have to guarantee in their constitution that they will never join NATO or the European Union, any sort of, quote, Western bloc. However, as long as they get to keep their political leadership, that's not a terrible deal, given that it would completely take away all of the, it would take, the Russian forces would withdraw, they get to keep their political regime, they get to keep defensive weapons. At the same time, can you really trust somebody who's bombing the hell out of your country and who's just...
Well, I mean, as much as you can trust anybody, as much as you can trust the Western countries, as much as the Kurds could trust us when we said, yeah, support us with Saddam, we'll take care of you. I mean, look, what I can trust is that if you don't do this, that Putin is going to continue to bomb the hell out of you and kill a lot of you. But I'm also hearing though that the Russians are struggling mighty and all the rest of it. The Russians are struggling so mightily that Zelensky's willing to concede all 4 points of the Russians' demands. But the Russians are struggling so heavily. We continue.
Invaded you?
Yeah, not
I don't know. It's tough, right? So it's easy for us to say here on this side of the Atlantic, oh, you should take that deal. But over there, obviously, there's some bitter feelings. But from their speech, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And things are also ramping up into U.S. contact with Russia, too.
Yeah, so a few more details about what is being reported in the sort of draft peace deal here. First of all, I think it's important to say that there is no way of knowing that the Russians are actually negotiating in good faith.
Yeah, zero.
That's the massive caveat here. And in fact, Max said on, is that how you say his last name?
Max, yeah.
He's been a wonderful follow during all of this and has done some of the best reporting, I think, on the potential outlines of a peace deal. And a Ukrainian source told him, listen, there's a likelihood this is trickery and illusion. They lie about everything, Crimea, the buildup of troops on the border, and the hysteria over the invasion. So that's the gigantic caveat that hangs over all of this. But we have to have some hope that a peace deal is potentially going to come together. Some of the other details here.
Well, again, I think some of this is just folks falling victim to their own propaganda. Mr. Putin has never said that this was a full scale. This was part of the debate that I actually wish I would have brought up, because one of the things that we had in the debate yesterday was the discussion of if the Russians are so overwhelmingly more powerful than the Ukrainians, how come they haven't flattened them? And one of the things that I didn't bring up was the most obvious. Mr. Putin never said, I'm here to flatten Ukraine. He said that this was a special operation, one, to deal with the NATO situation, and two, to denazify Ukraine, which we know that denazifying Ukraine is not really that important to him because that's not even didn't make the top 4 demands of Ukraine. It would make my demands. I would make post-reconstruction aid contingent upon denazification as an American. But it's not even Mr. Putin's demands. But my question is simply, what if what Mr. Putin said is what he meant, namely that this was a red line for him, and he's not going to tolerate it, but he doesn't want to occupy the country. He doesn't want to flatten the country. He just wants to communicate to Ukraine, the Baltic states, and the United States, I'm not playing with this NATO stuff. What if that's his end game? If you take the man at his word, then a lot of this becomes a lot more simplified, in my opinion. We continue.
Is that they say the 15-point draft would involve Kyiv renouncing its ambitions to join NATO. They seem to be ready to do that. That seems to be maybe, kind of the lowest hanging fruit. And promising not to host foreign military bases or weaponry in exchange for protection from allies like the US, UK, and Turkey, according to people who are involved. However, the nature of Western guarantees for Ukrainian security and their acceptability to Moscow, that could prove to be a big obstacle to any deal, as could the status of the country's territory seized by Russia and its proxies in 2014. So those are the big sticking points.
Okay. So yeah, I could see Ukraine saying, fine, we won't join NATO, but we won't join NATO. We'll draft that in the Constitution, but will you protect us should Russia decide to double cross us once we say we're not going to join NATO? I have no problem saying fine. My position has always been, people say, it doesn't matter about NATO. He would do it anyway. Well, then make him prove that. Make Putin prove that. Make Putin prove that he would do it regardless. We're still stronger than him. They still can't deal with us in an actual conflict. And I don't believe that Mr. Putin is suicidal. I don't think he is. And I don't think People are like, well, he's a power-hungry maniac. Well, one of the things about power-hungry maniacs is they like being in power. And so let Putin prove that he would do that. There is no historical precedent of that, dear listener. I asked this question. I said, what have the Russians done since acceding Berlin to indicate that they have these colonial imperialistic designs over that area of Europe? That seems to me a masterclass in national projection. That's how we are as Americans. We eat up people's land and we eat up people's resources and militarily intimidate them. So we think that everybody is like us. And I don't think that that's necessarily the case. Putin at the negotiating table is starting to give ground while increasing military assaults. This is not an unusual situation, trying to gain as much ground as possible and damage the enemy. Correct. And I would say it's analogous to just a few days ago, Zelensky asking us for no-fly zones, Zelensky asking us for MiGs, while simultaneously 2 or 3 days later going to the negotiating table and saying, okay, let's make a deal. So both sides are doing this. One is just more capable than the other, as it were, currently. And as Stephen A. says, Putin is not mad, nor is he suicidal. I agree. I agree with that. We continue.
Ukraine says, okay, we're going to, quote unquote, demilitarize, not have offensive capabilities, not host foreign bases on our soil. In exchange for that, we need some kind of a security guarantee from the West, from the US, from the UK, from Turkey and others. What does that look like? What does that language look like? First of all, we, have a vested interest in knowing what those sort of security guarantees look like, but that's also where you could have an issue with Moscow and then, of course, negotiating over those territories. So those are the sticking points. But the fact that you do have language on both sides indicating we're getting closer together, and you no longer have the Russians talking about denazification, which was the thing that really was just this broad brush, like anyone that we don't like that opposes us, we consider a Nazi and we want to get out of there. That
ridiculous, Crystal. Ridiculous. Again, I don't believe, and I don't think anybody truly believed that Putin had a moral aversion to Nazis. I think that because he understands how Western media was throwing around the term Nazi, Mr. Putin was silly enough to believe that Americans, especially neoliberal Americans, really cared about Nazism. And he really thought to himself, once these people figure out that there are actual Nazis in there that are like descended from actual Nazis who actually massacred actual Jews by the tens of thousands, they're going to care. He overestimated the Western world and he underestimated the power of Western media. He overestimated the minds of the Western neoliberal. No, Crystal, there were objective Nazis and are objective Nazis. C-14 is an objectively Nazified group of people. Azov are objectively Nazis. There are absolutely Nazis there. It's just that Mr. Putin, trust me, if Mr. Putin could have predicted that all those people that were railing against Nazis 4 or 5 years ago when it was Trump, if he would have known that they didn't care about actual Nazis, he wouldn't have said that, I promise you. I disagree with you there, but we continue.
Also is a hopeful indication.
Those are totally hopeful. And the reason why we should support this is, look, also if you're Ukraine, you need to show the world you did everything possible in order to put an end to this thing. And then if the Russians do break their word, and let's say they're using this as a guise in order to launch a full-scale military.
Are you saying that a leader who has journalists shot dead outside the Kremlin and murders exiled Russians is not very moral? Yeah, that was one of my first introductions to Putin was when he poisoned that dude, that poor fella. No, he's not very moral. He's not a very moral person. I don't believe he's a very, very moral person at all. But this is a very, 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 very good sign. Very good sign. Let's continue this, guys. So there are the two sides. Putin left off the denazification, which Crystal's saying is a good thing. I'm saying he left off a denazification because he never cared about the Nazis in the first place. I agree. Historically, Russians hate Nazis deeply, etc. I understand that, but I don't believe that Putin would make this a a red line in negotiations. It would be a red line for me because I actually don't believe in Nazism and funding Nazis, and there's no circumstance on the planet in which I would support it. But what I'm saying is, he thought the Western media and Western neoliberals actually cared about Nazis, but in reality, it was just the term Nazi was just being used as a political cudgel to get power away from Donald Trump and to basically intimidate anybody who supported Trump, to basically socially blackmail them, because then you could say, oh, that means you're a Nazi. That's all the term Nazi meant for the last 5 years. And this situation has proved that definitively.
Then the sympathy of the world will only be even more so on your side, if that's some trickery that they're up to. It's clear that the U.S. is now taking more of a diplomatic role with Russia. The first U.S. diplomatic contact, let's put this up there on the screen, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan had a call with his counterpart on the Secretary of Russian National Security. Now look, in terms of the statement, you don't get very much out of it. The fact that the call took place at all, though, that's significant. That's a good thing. Have direct lines of communication, talk to your adversaries, talk what the sticking points are. We're not going to know what the details are, but in the context of where the peace deal possibly could be going, it's all a good thing. Let's put this next one up there, which is that the Russians have released a 15-point tentative peace plan that would include a ceasefire and a Russian withdrawal. Now, to be
okay, that's good. Again, that's good. That's what I would like to see. I would like to see the Russians pull back on the aggression. And if they could get a back office deal where Putin says, look, we'll stop fucking you guys up, stop asking the Americans for no-fly zones, and then we can have a temporary ceasefire until we continue to negotiate, that would be the best of all possible worlds, dear listener. Don't you agree? I know that we all agree with that, but we've got some American senators that won't go on TV and agree with it.
Clear, this is the Russian demands. What exactly is a part of this is, like we said, there's the Ukrainian constitutional commitments on NATO. There's also a guarantee of a semi-guarantee of the political leadership in Kiev. But the most significant demands are the ones that we have already put out.
Yeah.
Now, the important thing is that the document exists.
Yes. Let me say one other thing about this in terms of the U.S. Ryan Grimm. So the lawmakers are very eager. We showed you the aid package that's been rushed together, the massive amount, I mean, truly extraordinary amount of weapons that we've flooded the.
We've read you the ridiculous arsenal of weapons that we were giving to these people. I mean, it was unbelievable. And people were saying we should do more. Dear listener, we cleared $800 million, $2 billion in total of aid since the Biden administration began. It is unbelievable. We continue.
With in Ukraine, U.S. lawmakers are very keen on that part, and they like to talk about that part a lot. Ryan Grimm has been pressing Jen Psaki on, hey, Zelensky says, give us these weapons, but the other part of his demand is help us more with the diplomacy. Right. Have you or will you empower him in those negotiations to be able to say to Russia, if you do X, Y, and Z, the U.S. and NATO will roll back their sanctions, because that gives him a lot more ability and a lot more power in those negotiations. If this is the massive stick that we've tried to use to batter Russia into submission here and get them to be reasonable in these talks, which is, kind of a little bit of wishful thinking, but this is the giant stick that we've used. You have to be able to empower Zelensky to be able to say, hey, you do this, then us and our allies are going to roll back these sanctions. The administration has not said whether they're willing to do that. And Ryan pressed Psaki at press briefing, on exactly that. And she really wouldn't answer. So,
Interesting, guys. Very, very interesting. It's the same thing that happened when Tucker pressed Salazar to even say, hey, wouldn't diplomacy, peace, and de-escalation be better than this constant bloodletting between Ukraine and Russia? She refused to answer the question. She said, we've talked too much about that. Let's talk about the border. As in our border, as in immigration, and then she brought up race. She said the Browns because she knows Tucker's audience are going to get triggered by that because they're not very disciplined when it comes to the Browns. And now you've got Ryan Grimm asking Jen Psaki, and Jen's, it's almost as if the United States government, whether you be Democrat or Republican, with a few exceptions, are univocal in wanting this conflict to continue. It's almost as if the American government doesn't really want peace, but wants to continue this conflict so as to make Russia more and more of a pariah on the world stage. This is what it looks like to me. I hope you guys are seeing this right now. It's unbelievable.
No, it's just this is another sign of the times, sign of where the bipartisan consensus is. They're all for sending all kinds of weapons and offensive capability and supporting the Ukrainians with, we've talked about some of the intelligence that's in the coordination, military coordination, which is quite extraordinary as well. But when it comes to the diplomatic front and how we actually build this off-ramp and hopefully resolve this conflict, we get a lot less discussion. You have very few lawmakers pressing the administration on this. Of course, the media, and we'll get to the media later on.
Shouldn't our lawmakers, shouldn't our senators and all the rest of these people be head over heels? Shouldn't we be flooding the UN and the Ukraine with pressure upon pressure and pressure to have peace? Shouldn't we be going for a diplomatic de-escalation? Why are we spending $2 billion to escalate conflict? How many billions did we spend to de-escalate the conflict? We sanctioned the hell out of those poor people over there in Russia. We destroyed the ruble. We went farther than people even thought or projected, including Putin, which probably precipitated his ask to China. Why our government immediately, it seems to be the American way. When these police run into one of us, de-escalation doesn't seem to be the instinct. Why? But Putin's the bad guy. Putin's the most dangerous guy on the planet. Are you sure? You sure?
Nothing to say, pushing them in the direction of diplomacy.
Right.
It's always in the direction of escalation. It's always in the direction of more sanctions, more weapons, and all of that. So that's another thing to keep an eye on. To my mind, I think Ro Khanna is one of the only representatives who's really been talking about not just the military and the sanctions, but also, hey, we've got to empower the Ukrainians as much as possible in these diplomatic talks.
Yeah, that's right. The ideal is that the way this works is that if the two of them, the Ukrainians and the Russians, can agree on some sort of framework, then the great powers need to get involved. And it would be Ukraine, and it would be Russia, the European Union, the United States, Russia, and China. And if those three, obviously Russia, included in there, if those groups can come together and agree on a rollback with the sanctions, it would look a lot like the ideal of the Iran deal. That's how we got with the P5+1 deal, was to negotiate and create, the architecture, the great powers, both in economic might and military might, coordinate that towards a singular goal. That is a possible way this could get done. Look, this is all wishful thinking. All of this could be a ruse. And, we've seen enough of these fall apart. I think I watched something like 20 ceasefires.
It could be a ruse. It could be a ruse. Or when Putin mentioned NATO 40 times and said that there was a knife to the throat of his country, maybe he was being sincere. And maybe he's not extending the full might of the Russian military because he's not trying to crush or occupy or flatten that country. One, he's got the Donbass region there. Those are Russian identified folks. So he can't just go in there and just completely wreck shop anyway. Maybe. So I get it. You don't trust him. There's reason not to trust him. No, there's reasons not to trust Vladimir Putin. I understand that. What I'm saying is, what we can trust is the other side, that he will maintain aggression if you don't give concede to his very, very reasonable demands. We continue.
Fires not happen in Syria. So don't get your hopes up. They almost always fail. But a paper I remember reading in grad school, which used to give me hope, was the more attempts at a ceasefire, the more likely an eventual ceasefire is likely to happen.
Yeah.
So that may sound like a tautology, but what it is that the more attempts that you have at peace, even though they're very extremely likely to fail, the more likely you actually are to have peace in the end. So trying to open lines of communication, which seem futile, frustrating, stupid, almost always break down. And yes, sometimes they do break down. You have to fight to the death, but it's actually pretty rare in the history of human conflict. So pursuit of peace in and of itself is a goal which it's not satisfying in the short term, but can pay off in the long run.
Yeah, and there's two other reasons to be a little bit hopeful, which is, the very first talks that were held between the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, relatively short.
Yeah,
a couple hours, and that was that. These have been going on now for days, and they've continued the lines of communication. So that's one thing. The other thing, which you found, Sagar, let's go ahead and put this tweet up on the screen, is, you have some interesting rhetoric here from the Chinese.
Yes.
Oh boy, let's see what the Chinese have to say. Her answer. So this is in regard to Putin poisoning the journalist or the other guy. What makes you so sure his enemies didn't poison journalists just so they could blame him? I don't know the truth, but that is actually something in the realm of reality in the sick world of propaganda that we live. Of course, all that shit is on the table. Guys, we're talking about all this stuff confidently as if we know what's going on. And now, if you question, I decided against running a story on it because it's not important enough in the grand scheme of things. But the Hunter Biden thing came out, where the New York Times finally admitted, yeah, the Hunter Biden laptop thing, that was legit. Actually, that was legit. But if you said that, Twitter deplatformed, I think the New York Post or something like that, for talking about it. They literally deleted it or whatever. Suspended. I forgot what they did. And now we find out, no, actually, the whole thing was true the entire time. So how do we know anything that these people are telling us? Oh, Putin did this, Putin did that. Yeah, and Saddam, the baby's in the incubator. Assad, he gassed his own people. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. Ben Webb says, I'm not defending Putin. He is the aggressor in this one. However, this didn't happen in a vacuum. We systematically set this up. Of course, we systematically set this up. And it's clear to me that we're systematically egging this on. Because these guys won't even go on, regular old mainstream media and say peace would be better than war. They won't even say that. They will say, let's have a no-fly zone over Russia to punish Putin, but they won't come on TV and say peace is better than war. And I don't know what else you need to see that there's something really, really wrong with American leadership in regard to this specific conflict. What else would you need to see to know that that's what they want? Unbelievable. The answer to the Putin poisoning thing, as Steven says, he's a very, very trustworthy source. In the answer to the Putin poisoning comment, the political enemies of Putin were poisoned, and some of those toxins are only available from government-run labs. Okay? So you could say, well, maybe there's a rogue government Putin guy that double and triple crossed. But if you apply Occam's razor to the situation and you look at the overall track record of Putin, you could not say with certainty, but you could say more likely than not that Putin had a hand in that, right? So that's how I'd respond to that. Oh, we're absolutely egging it on. We're absolutely egging it on. No, Shouse. We're our government, but we'll talk about that later. But let's continue. Did I lose the video? I lost the video. We'll bring it right back. And Mr. Schaus, how come our media isn't showing the Yemeni mother holding her dying child? The Yemenis are getting starved out. My community has done some help to help those people, bless God. But Mr. Schaus, what spurs us on is the woman holding her dead child. Then why aren't there any images of the Yemeni woman holding her dead child to spur us on to righteousness? Serious question. Very, very serious question. But let's go back to this. Let's see what the Chinese
Let's
are
get
saying.
to the diplomatic section of this. So let's go ahead.
Russia.
I remember reading in grad school, which used to give me hope, was
No, I know you'll agree with that, but my question is, why aren't they? It's clear that our media is making a decision on which conflicts to emphasize and which conflicts to stir you up emotionally and which ones that you're supposed to turn a callous blind eye to, Stephen. That's what I'm saying. So your media is purposely manipulating your emotions. For what reason? There's some aspects of human suffering which they want you to completely ignore and be apathetic to and not bat an eyelash about. And then there are other aspects of human suffering that are designed to get you into a tizzy and to get you to suspend your rational faculties. I'm not saying you. I'm saying you as a stand-in for the American public. So the question is why? That's the question.
the more attempts at a ceasefire, the more it's not satisfying in the short term, but can pay off in the long run.
Yeah, and there's two other reasons to be.
Yeah, exactly. But our media, for example, Stephen, our media was really divided during the Trump era. During the Trump era, right-wing media was saying X and left-wing media was saying Y. Right-wing media would run certain stories to make Biden look bad. Left-wing media would run certain stories to make Trump look bad. But across the board now, they're all doing the same thing. They're ignoring the suffering of Yemeni people and getting you all emotional about Ukrainian people. They're not talking to you about Russian people. They're not telling you how Russian people feel about shit. They haven't told you how Russian people, their anxieties about their enemy, the people who are hostile to them, accumulating all these limitless arms at the border to tug at your heartstrings. They didn't do that. That's my question. Why?
A little bit hopeful, which is, the very first talks that were held between the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, relatively short.
Yeah, that's right.
Couple
These are
hours,
long, right.
and that was that. These have been going on now for days, and they've continued the lines of communication. So that's one thing. The other thing, which you found, Sagar, let's go ahead and put this tweet up on the screen, is, you have some interesting rhetoric here from the Chinese.
Yes.
So the tweet, go ahead and put this
Sagar
last
don't
tweet
like
up,
Chinese, I guess.
A11.
Right.
There
Sagar's
couldn't be a
not a
more
fan of
powerful
Chinese.
sign of which way the wind is blowing in Ukraine. China meeting with Ukraine officials in Lviv. So the Chinese actually came to Lviv. And they said, we have seen how great the unity of the Ukrainian people is. That's per the Chinese ambassador is quoted as saying. So the fact that the Chinese are there, that they are showing some, at least rhetorical solidarity with the Ukrainians is also, an indication that hopefully some pressure is being put on Russia behind the scenes too.
That's a smart play by China. They're not, it's not 2049 yet, and they're not in a situation where they can end up being a global pariah. You saw what happened in the Hong Kong markets. I was about to run those shows, but I decided against it. Well, maybe I'll keep doing it. A lot less talk about Syria, too. There were sites showing the dead babies. Those images can't be put on mainstream media, but people are still dying in far less coverage. And I just want to challenge all of you. If if we think we're moral people, we're moral people because we get emotional when we see this woman laid out on a stretcher and her baby died as well. But you knew that we've been doing this shit to people all over the fucking planet for the last 20 years? I can't tell you how many times I said, we drone bombed 30 pine nut farmers. We killed people at their weddings. We dismembered them, yada, yada, yada. And dig deep into your heart. How many times have you heard that and not batted an eyelash? Tell the truth to yourself. But now all of a sudden, we're so morally virtuous, but because we can't bear to see this suffering. You guys are sophisticated people over here at Middle America. You know the shit that's happening over there in Yemen. Because I've talked about it a bunch. We've talked about the Horn of Africa. We've talked about Syria. Why all of a sudden now do we care so much about innocent people being killed? See, that's why I look at that and I say, that's horrible. It's terrible. The reason I don't have the giant emotional reaction is because my emotions have been spread out all over the place in regard to suffering all over the place. So I am not going to singularize this kind of suffering as particular. When I look at this suffering now, I'm at the place where I say, that's really sad. How do I stop that from happening? Some of you guys that know me well know I've got an insomnia problem. So this is stuff that you pace about at night. Because you replace those children with your children and that woman with your wife. And you say, what can we do, if anything, to stop this from happening again? Our media is not trying to help us with that question because they won't even let you ask it. All you need to know is that Putin is bad. That's all you need to know.
This is the Chinese version of there are fine people on good sides,
There
on both sides.
people.
Yeah, very fine people in Ukraine, in Russia, good people. Sorry, I had to get that out of there.
Very true.
In terms of how Putin is talking, though, look, the hot language that continues towards the Russian people is very much there. Here he gave an address to the Russian people. We have a dub of that. Let's take a listen.
So we have exerted all ways to resolve the matter peacefully. The problem that occurred not by our fault, and in this
Of course not. It's not my fault. You got these are grown adults using the same shit we all used as kids when there was a conflict. Holy smokes.
regard, we were forced to launch this special military operation. The Russian troops near Kiev, near other Ukrainian cities, has nothing to do with our intention to occupy the country. That's not our objective.
Okay, there it is.
So that's a very key. Occupation
Isn't the objective. And again, this is where we continually call this a siege and an invasion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I suppose I guess you could say we invaded Pakistan when we went to kill UBL. My point is, I don't believe that Mr. Putin is trying to own and occupy Ukraine. People were saying, oh, Ukraine's got these precious materials, yada, yada, yada. But again, I feel like that's more of us projecting what we do. You know, when we killed Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and then we occupied those oil refineries, and people were like, well, are you going to give that to the Iraqi people? And Trump was like, I don't know. Maybe we'll sell it back to them. Hey, we went in there and cleaned up the situation, so we should kind of be rewarded for it. Trump came out and said, hey, we're just going to take their shit. Okay, what are they going to do? So we, because we're so used to our country doing that all across the world, we impose that onto Putin. What if Putin doesn't think like an American? And what if he says, no, I just want to make you people understand that if you don't give me some buffer between you and NATO, I'm going to wreck shop, and I'm going to put the world into a giant upheaval because I'm going to secure my motherland. What if that is the primary motivation from Mr. Putin?
is not our objective. Could be a lie. This could, they could say they'll stay there forever for peacekeeping. We've seen that before on many sides in terms of people. But I think that even though he has the hot rhetoric and he called out the oligarchs and all that.
Thank you, Plutot Krever. Interesting name, by the way.
He's still saying, look, occupation is not our end goal. So that could be a signal to an off-ramp to the Russian people. We're just trying to read tea leaves here, and obviously we want to be hopeful, but...
Americans are uniquely evil, and I've been saying it for years. The thing is, when I say it, people say I'm crazy. For some reason, when Vin says the same shit, he gets views. We are uniquely evil. I agree with you. We're uniquely evil, and we're uniquely apathetic to the sufferings of people in the world. I agree with that. the reason you don't get views when you say it, Ben, is because you need to start a channel, which I've been telling you to do for a year and a half. I'll tell you right now, I would probably shut down Middle America and just work with Ben if Ben had a YouTube channel. Honestly, he's one of the greatest thinkers of all time. He's really, really extreme, but I don't know how long he'd last. But yeah, Ben, I've been agreeing with you, but you don't shoot videos, so nobody can watch your shows. We continue.
It seems crazy until it's not crazy, until you have an actual peace deal. And we remain hopeful that
the language around the oligarchs was pretty interesting.
That was
some real like sort of populist flame throwing with regards to the oligarchs, which I think, you know, is probably pretty popular with his domestic audience. He says he's focused on a certain type of trader, those who, quote, earn money here in Russia but live there, meaning in the West, who like foie gras and oysters. So, so he's trying to position himself as like, I'm the true champion of the people, and these rich people are leeching off of you, and they're anti-Russian, and those sorts of things. The reality is it's a completely symbiotic relationship. And, you know, the other thing I'd say about the oligarchs is I wouldn't hold your breath waiting for them to turn on Putin or have any sort of significant influence in ending this ultimately, because, they don't like the Western sanctions. But thanks to our wonderful banking system, they, you know, even under sanctions, have gotten richer and richer. So their livelihoods are not threatened. And number two, their wealth is completely dependent on this guy. So without Putin, they don't have the property and the rights and the, you know, their ability to earn the massive ill-begotten fortunes that they have.
Yeah, there was an interview on The Realignment with Nate Sibley. He's kind of a sanctions expert. He explained this really well, which is that the way that we conceive of the oligarchs as an independent power base in Russia, it doesn't really exist anymore. That was the case from the early 2000s up until 2014. But part of the reason that Putin purged the oligarchs and Western influence is because all of the immense pressure that he got on his regime from the oligarchs when he took over Crimea. They were like, hey man, you're screwing with business. And at that time, they were very popular. So since 2014, he's undergone a campaign to basically root out, imprison, and destroy their power of those oligarchs and make them totally dependent on him. So they don't really exist in the same independent power base that they did in like 2006, 2007. It's a totally different situation now. It's much more like a top-down autocracy
feel like
than it
said,
is
let's
anything
go to
else.
all of
Just something to keep in mind, you know, for people out there.
By the way, another thing to keep in mind is we helped create the system, and Matt Taibbi lays this out very well in the interview we did with him last week.
People should go and watch that interview. It did really well. I was happy about that.
Yeah, Matt's always really insightful on this stuff.
Yeah. Hey guys, we're going to be totally upfront with you. This is the most perilous time that we have ever operated.
Unfortunately for you, I'm gonna keep going even though we ended the video. But here's what I want to say about this video, and then we're gonna jump right into another one. This is a very, very good sign, and if these initial peace talks break down, which they may or may not, this is the direction we need to go in, and America needs to do whatever we can to continue to negotiate for peace. When I was in school in Florida, I went to Stone Junior High School right before we moved to New Jersey and New York, which is when I ended up in the Bronx. There was some racial tension, and Southwest Junior High School was on the white side of the city. Stone Junior High School was on the black side of the city, and so there were these race wars between Stone and Southwest, especially at the football games. And if Southwest beat Stone, then the black kids at Southwest had problems, and then vice versa. And things got so hectic one of the things I appreciated about Florida in my experience, though, was that it was all fighting. There were no guns, there were no knives. So I stupidly went into New York with the same idea, you square up with people and all of that, and I was quickly disabused of the notions that they functioned there. New York functioned very differently, and you had to make adjustments. Okay. But the school resource officer on the first day of orientation, when I hit Stone Junior High School, she said, if you participate in these race riots, it's battery. It's assault and battery. We'll arrest you. We'll put it on your record. You're going to go up to, I forgot what the juvenile facility was, yada, yada, yada. And then she said, if you are an instigator, we will charge you as an accessory, and you will also go up to the yada, 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 yada. And I said, what the hell, an instigator? And so they explained. Some guy steps on somebody's shoe, The other guy says, oh, my bad. But then in comes the instigator that says, oh, you gonna let him step on your shoe? Oh, my God, you a bitch. Now you got to start fighting, and it turns into a giant race war, yada, yada, yada. And so this was something that was happening over and over again between the two schools. So the leadership got together and said, okay, we're gonna make life very difficult for the instigator as well. Dear listener, our country has been functioning as the instigator and the provoker of this conflict for quite some time. And even now, as these two leaders who represent their various countries are meeting, up to yesterday night, our leadership refused to come out and say peace is better than war. They couldn't even bring themselves to suggest that Zelensky de-escalate and be peaceful. They couldn't even bring themselves to say peace is better than jihad. Our country are the instigators here. Make no mistake about it. And I got to ask again, why? Why? So this is one of the reasons I've been saying, can we stop with this hyper simplistic, silly idea that the world is as black and white and as obvious as the media portrays it to be? Can we stop with this Putin is automatically bad, everything he says and does is bad, Zelensky is now fucking Captain America? Stop it. Think, please. We need more thinking heads in the circle. Nothing is that simple. Ask yourselves the question, who's benefiting from this? What is our country's angle? Why are they not flooding the airwaves with this stuff? Why is CNN? I'm going to go to CNN's website right now. And I'm going to see if they're front paging this very momentous news that these two are in serious discussions about something that could negotiate for peace. Let's see. How the attack at a maternity and children's hospital unfolded. There it is. Drones fly into NATO territory, force the alliance to decide how to respond to incidents inside its borders. You see that? You see that? Hold on, my beautiful mug is covering it up. I can see in the thing. There it is right there. That's on front page. Drones flying into NATO force the alliance to decide how to respond. So if you're a regular CNN consumer, all you're seeing is how Putin may be one of the richest people on the planet. A Russian bomb devastated a hospital. Drones flying into NATO territory force the alliance to decide how to respond. You're not being told in blur with the neon lights, hey guys, these guys are talking for peace. Maybe we're on the way to peace. Maybe our folks should be discussing peace. All you're saying is, oh no, there's drones flying into NATO airspace. Maybe we need to get into the conflict, Article 5, etc., etc., etc. Do you see? All you would know is Russian aggression, and more propaganda. Here's Vitaly Klitschko. Kiev Mayor Vitaly Klitschko reacts to Russia's claim, and it's bullshit because you're a badass if you use edgy language. It's unbelievable what these people are doing. It's absolutely unbelievable what these people are doing. Okay, guys, we need CNN needs Trump reelected. Correct. Sadakt. It's Joe Rogan's fault. Okay, guys, here we go. Speaking of the media, Rising has another piece about the media. It's called Supercut Media Thirst, etc., etc. So I'm gonna do a Middle America intro, and then we'll just talk about it again, and then you'll see me cut it up in little bits. Or should I just? What should I do? I'm wasting time. Let's just get into it. All right, guys, here we go. Give me a second. Peace may be on the horizon, but is the media thirsty for war? And what is more dangerous than Vladimir Putin? Let's talk about it, y'all. Middle America.
And you ain't black.
The first time ever any
We are Americans indeed. What's up, dear listener? I feel like I just saw you. My name is Vincent. This is Middle America. We're not left wing, we're not right wing, we're just right. I'm messing with you guys. Facebook.com/America Middle if you want to join the conversation. We have been covering the Ukraine and Russia crisis. In the previous episode we just looked at, we saw that that Mr. Zelensky and Mr. Putin have been sitting down discussing maybe we can have some negotiations for peace and end this waking nightmare that we've all endured, just so that we could get some respite to go to the next government/media created nightmare. Now, having said that, dear listener, speaking of the media, because the media has played a significant role in informing us as to what's been going on, here is a clip from Rising. It's called Supercut Media Thirst for War. Let's check it out together.
Another part of the landscape that we've been tracking is the fact that the media is like the most hawkish group in the entire country.
Right.
And they only ever, and not just in this particular circumstance, but they only ever push in favor of more escalation and more war. We saw this really clearly with their coverage in Afghanistan. You know, they didn't give a shit about Afghan civilians for 20 years. And then the minute Biden actually tries to end the war, then for like 2 weeks, they actually care about Afghan civilians. And then once it's over, they once again, don't care. And so what we see here is a consistent drumbeat. They're not pushing the administration over what Ryan Grimm is saying, hey, what are you doing to enable peace? What are you doing to push for diplomacy here? No, they're consistently pushing for more escalation, potentially provoking World War III. This is a video.
It really makes you wonder what angle Tucker Carlson has, because Tucker Carlson has been consistently anti-war. I did not know this, but apparently the folks at Fox News, I'm not watching enough Fox, but apparently the folks at Fox News are also advocating for a no-fly zone, et cetera, et cetera. I don't understand this stuff at all, but here we go.
Compilation put together by The Intercept of the questions that are being asked of the Biden administration routinely. Let's take a look at that.
Why does the U.S. believe they know better what Ukraine needs than what Ukrainian officials are saying they need the most?
It sounds like, we're pretty dug in on our position when it comes to the no-fly zone, when it comes to the MiGs, despite this growing bipartisan call in Congress to shift a little bit.
It seems like we're pretty dug in on the no-fly zones and the MiGs, but they want us to shift a little bit. Shift a little bit to what, ma'am? Shift a little bit to what? Shift on the no-fly zones? Shoot down Russian planes?
So to put it bluntly, is Zelensky wasting his time tomorrow asking for these things?
President Zelensky is going to be speaking to Congress tomorrow. He's been pushing for fighter jets, a no-fly zone. You have to hear some of those same requests tomorrow as well. Has the administration shifted on that at all?
Though, calling for a no-fly zone. They're a NATO member.
Man, this lady, this lady's really pushing. She's really pushing for this no-fly zone, huh? Now you're gonna bring Estonia into it, okay?
They share a border with Russia. How do we view their calls for a no-fly zone?
And on President Zelensky's address tomorrow, of course, he is expected to ask for more assistance, as my colleague noted. A lot of the U.S. positions on that haven't changed, as you just said, when it comes to the no-fly zone. But on the aircraft specifically, the Pentagon said last week that Secretary Austin said they do not support the transfer of additional fighter aircraft at this time.
Good.
Is that still the United States' position?
Would a strike in Poland on supplies or anything really automatically be met with a military or forceful response, or simply a conversation amongst allies about how to respond?
Unbelievable, these people.
Reports that a Russian drone made its way into Polish airspace before.
That's what we just saw on the CNN website. Okay, that was 15 March. That was 15 March where she was reporting on that, and it is now 17 March. Happy what do you call that? Happy St. Patty's Day, by the way. And CNN is still front paging that on their website, and not front paging the most recent news, which is a sit down and peace negotiations between Zelensky and Putin, where Zelensky's saying, yeah, the NATO thing sounds reasonable, so does Crimea and Donbass. And we've got some ideas too. Nope, we're not going to front page that, but we are going to page one this story from a couple days ago. Unbelievable.
Going back to Ukraine and being shot down, does a drone into Poland count?
Former ambassador to Ukraine, Maria Ivanovich, has been quite outspoken recently. And she said we need to mitigate risk, but it's also true that not taking greater action comes with a risk as well. Because Putin is a bully and he only understands strength.
Yes, it would risk World War III. But inaction would also be risky because Putin's a bully and he only understands strength. Do you know where we heard this before, dear listener? Yes, there might be a risk that we would be killing innocent people going into Iraq because they may or may not have WMDs. But Saddam Hussein and those Muslims, look at the history of Muslims. They only understand strength, dear listener. Same play, literally the same playbook. You essentialize somebody, you particularize one aspect of their personality, you convince people that they're impossible to be reasoned with, so the only thing you can do is kill him. He can't be reasoned with. I don't know, talk to Zelensky. Seems like they're reasoning very well with one another.
Is the president showing enough strength against Putin? If Putin were to use chemical weapons, would it change the president's thinking when it comes to these MiGs, taking the no-fly zone off the table, but at least on this issue? Are you prepared? Can you give us any more details about what that threat means of severe consequences? The president obviously made the same threat last week. Is that purely economic consequences, or would there potentially be a military threat?
Wow.
So you see there just consistent every question. What about the no-fly zone? But what about the no-fly zone? But what about the MiGs? Tell me more about the MiGs. And to the
we ended up sending MiGs, right? Didn't we say we're going to send the MiGs, or was that just a request? I'm not even sure anymore. I'm not even sure. Did we send MiGs? I'm not sure. I don't know. Somebody confirm or deny whether or not we sent those MiGs that they requested.
That Psaki actually just recently noted, she has answered that question about the planes, she says, 167 times, to which Kristen Welker there says, well, here's the 168th.
If you want to know why I had to get the hell out of that room, that's why. I remember just looking around and be like, oh, you guys are idiots. You don't know anything. I mean, you're very good at posturing on television. I guess that's a skill. That's it. I mean, they're unable to see a complete one dimension of the impact of their questions, of their policy, how they can create the systems and the incentives of which the policymakers will then respond to. They are outright pushing for World War III. Why don't we send more weapons? Who are you to decide that you know better than Zelensky? We're not saying that we know better for them, that in Ukraine, we know what's good for us. That's
the exact same thing that Salazar said to Tucker yesterday. Who am I to say if peace would be better than war for the Ukrainians? That's not for us to say, but it is for us to just write a blank check to continually send them everything they want and then send good American people over there to fucking die when we shoot down Russian jets. It's our place to say that, but who are we to say? If Zelensky comes, Zelensky's asking us for stuff. So then we do get to say, giving you this is not in our best interest. We get to say that. We do get to say, peace is in our best interest, and it's in the best interest of the world. So we don't have to play this faux morality game where we're not going to take oil from the Russians because we're so moral. Peace is in our best interest. We do get to say that. It's this ridiculous sort of faux humility. Who are we to say? Ridiculous.
Job of the U.S. government. They have no conception of sovereignty. And over and over and over and over again. Why not?
Mike, never milkshake is 100% correct. Poland will never send aircraft to Ukraine. This is insane. Correct. Poland ain't gonna do that nonsense, and we don't want them to because Poland is a NATO country, aren't they?
More. Why not more? You can see exactly there. What is the reward mechanism? The more you give, the more praise that you get from the media. People will give you as much. And then you slow walk yourself into a third world war. That's the exact opposite of what we should want. There is no incentive. I used to ask this stuff all the time. When I was most attacked by the White House press corps is when I would press Trump on the possibility of peace with North Korea. Because I was most concerned about nuclear war. I'd be like, why don't you invite Kim Jong-un to the...
One of the strangest criticisms during the Trump era where people actually lost their minds was when Trump crossed the border and shook hands with Kim. And people were like, oh my God, Trump is terrible, blah, blah, blah. Oh my God, this is the worst thing in the world. I was like, what? How is that bad? What? Guys, as a principle, offering your hand in solidarity and peace and mitigation of violence as a principle is always better than doing this rah-rah, saber-rattling, we're America nonsense. It's always better. Tulsi Gabbard meeting with Assad, better. But these people are so up to their necks in the blood of innocent people that this was a point of criticism of Tulsi during the debates. They criticized her for meeting with the guy. I don't care. Let me tell you, I'm going to tell you guys something right now. If Tulsi Gabbard is front loaded as a candidate for whoever's administration, as a leader in a foreign policy position, that is going to massively sway my vote. Massively. I'm just letting you know right now. We continue. Secretary of State Gabbard. I guarantee you, if we had Secretary of State Gabbard, there would have been no ISIS. There would have been no Arab Spring. There would have been no, we came, we saw, we killed them.
White House. When are you going to, do you view his recent outrage as good faith? These are not the way that you get notice in the press corps or you get clips. The way you get notice is, why are you not more forcefully denouncing the Kim regime? Listen, I think what's happening is terrible, but I want to avoid a nuclear exchange.
The political rewards are always on the side of being hawkish, and this is why. The only time they liked Trump is when he was bombing Syria.
That's a good point.
I mean, every time.
The beautiful site or whatever.
Brian Williams. Oh my God. But and
you guys remember that when he said the beautiful? I'm not even gonna play it. It was just so weird. I remember Jimmy talking about it. I said, Jimmy's doing the hyperbolic thing. That man didn't say that shit. And then we played it, and he was like, the beautiful side of the... I was like, holy shit. Soraya was like, wait, what did he just say? She said, rewind that shit, B. I rewound it. That's what he said. These are the people we're dealing with, dear listener. They like war.
People were like, this is when he became president, that whole thing.
I remember that.
The only political rewards are on the side of hawkishness. And this is how you end up with a landscape where overwhelmingly the American people are saying we have to do more, we have to do more, we have to do more, without recognizing how much we've already done, which is extraordinary and historically unprecedented. But because the media's constant drumbeat is you're not doing enough, you're not doing enough, you're not doing enough, you're not doing enough, of course that's the impression that's created. And this is where the three networks, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, are really basically indistinguishable.
Total uniparty.
This is complete uniparty stuff, complete bipartisan consensus, always pushing in only one direction. And so you have to know, if you're the Biden administration or the Obama administration or the Trump administration, that you are going to take a tremendous political hit because, of course, the American public...
Or if you're a YouTuber. at the beginning of this, I was bringing up NATO, and the guy said to me, "Come on, Finn, stop trying to be an intellectual. Just go on with the rest of the world." I said, my brother, the rest of the world agreed with me. This was a mainstream position that this NATO shit was going to turn a Cold War warm and a warm war hot. This was the position of anybody that was remotely conversant with that region for the last 30 years, the majority of the time I've been alive on this planet. I said, what the hell are you talking about? I am in the mainstream position. What he meant was the mainstream position in the last 2 minutes, because all that shit got pushed to the side because we wanted a saber rattle about Vladimir Putin.
Like when they see you getting attacked from all sides for not doing enough, of course that's going to have an impact on public opinion. We saw that very clearly with Afghanistan. I mean, that is when Biden's approval ratings really took a hit and have never recovered because you had such a consistent drumbeat from the press. And that's exactly.
Well, I do think the incompetent way in which Mr. Biden handled that exit also damaged him severely in the polls, because it was just massively incompetent what he did. I mean, honestly, the way that he handled the and of course Americans we're massively egomaniacal. I don't care what you think. We've got a massive national ego, and so. It looked like a win for the tally. People kept saying words like embarrassing and humiliating, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, our media played the role of, oh, you gonna let the tally do that to you? Of course, Mr. Trump tried to get us out of Afghanistan, but Pelosi and those folks didn't want Mr. Trump to get a win before the election, so they put the brakes on it. Plus, they released that silly thing about, you guessed it, the Russians were working with the tally in order to put bounties on U.S. troops, which was a complete lie. It was a lie. We continue.
What we're seeing here, you've got a lot of legislators. You already see a shift now. You've got some Democrats now calling for, hey, we got to get these fighter jets to them as well. No-fly zone still is mostly off the table. But this is how you end up putting a lot of pressure on the politicians who all want to posture as the ones who are, backing the tough thing and doing the most. So it's a dangerous situation when you have this landscape.
Combine it with, remember that exclusive story that we brought you, the audio about the White House press corps and who gets asked questions and don't?
That's right.
Yeah, well, do you notice where all those people are sitting, folks? In the front row.
Yeah,
that's the mainstream media.
Correct.
And they get to rig the whole briefing. They get to decide how long it takes. They get to decide who gets asked the questions. The people in the back, people like yours truly, who used to be there scrambling to try and get a question. Oh, you don't get a guaranteed question. And these people are the ones who might ask a dissident question about diplomacy. The questions matter. The incentive matters. The White House knows all three of the people they call on the front row who work for the cable networks will be played on loop for millions of people. And that is, again, feeds into the incentive structure of what they want to say, of how they want to message it to the people. And then when they ask these questions in drumbeat for war, there is no reward for diplomacy. I'll bring it back for the people who are not watching this fully or non-premium
None whatsoever.
people. What I was talking about in the A block and the diplomacy block was this, which is that most attempts at peace fail. However, as many attempts as you can at peace happen, the more likely that peace eventually does occur. It takes a long time. And you can think of it as kind of a negative feedback loop. Calling for peace is really hard because, you want to save face and all of that. Diplomacy and negotiation is also very difficult. It almost always collapses. There's almost always incentives against it in order to keep fighting. But if you keep trying and trying and trying and trying and trying, eventually you will come to an outcome.
And peace is easy. Like the type of negotiated settlement that they would have to come to here, which would involve some really significant concessions from Ukraine, like it's very easy to sort of posture against that and say, oh, you're giving Russia their way.
Right.
So that creates all these disincentives for the Biden administration to help support that diplomatic process. And that was another thing we talked about in the A bloc is you hear this consistent U.S. lawmakers very happy to talk about the sanctions. We got to do more. Very happy to talk about the military weapons, but very little pressure. I mean, basically no pressure on the Biden administration to actually empower Zelensky in terms of the diplomatic negotiations to try to achieve some sort of deal here by empowering him to say, hey, if Russia actually comes to the table and actually does, does their part and gives up a little bit too, that you are empowered to say, we're going to roll back the sanctions that have been imposed by the U.S. and NATO.
I would love to see a question. What are the red lines for negotiations of the United States and any negotiated settlement between Ukraine and them? Would you agree with President Zelensky's, ditching of NATO membership? Is that something that the United States would support? Does the Biden administration stand in support of a negotiated settlement whatsoever?
Yeah.
Great questions, right? You're not going to hear a single one of them.
No, there's never any pressure for peace.
Yeah,
never happens. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right.
There's never any pressure for peace. Here's Brian. What's his name? What's this guy's name? Brian Seltzer, whatever his name is, the CNN guy. This is the guy that said, why are people listening to Joe Rogan? We have desks. We have an HR department. Here we go. The past 24 hours are a reminder that consumers in an era of YouTube and TikTok still gravitate to trusted, established news outlets during emergencies. They know where to go, so to speak, and television coverage is essential. So, jihad makes it so that people are so terrified that they fall back on the authorities. You see how that works? Of course, Mr. Stelter, whatever his name is wrong, because if that was the case, then YouTube would not have had to have such draconian measures of we deplatformed 1,500 people and erased 1,000 videos already and got rid of 600 of Avi Martin's videos overnight for no reason whatsoever, and why Jimmy Dore got throttled to pieces, and he just recently yesterday hit the 1 million mark. Shout out to Jimmy Dore. So even there, he's wrong. You wouldn't need all that assistance from YouTube, Mr. Stelter, whatever your name is, if that were the case. Now, what I put on here was what is more dangerous than Vladimir Putin? And what is more dangerous than Vladimir Putin, dear listener, is very, very easy. The United States media apparatus. Dear listener, there's a very, very strange symbiosis of what's going on between our media and our government. On the one hand, it is clear that our government at points is running the media and the media apparatus. We know that. This was clearly demonstrated during the Trump administration. Clearly. We had this debate yesterday where the media on the UK side and the BBC, where the BBC admitted that they stifled independent contra-establishment journalism and promoted government propaganda about the Iraq war. We saw this during the Trump administration. Fox News, it was pro-Trump, 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 never did anything. Trump never did anything wrong in his life, never! Never. Meanwhile, on CNN and MSNBC, you had Rachel Maddow talking about Trump and the P tapes with the Russian prostitutes. I heard that not on some shit post from Reddit. I heard that in prime time from Rachel Maddow. So we know that the government and the media work hand in hand with one another. We know that. What's interesting is that it seems here in this segment that on top of that the media can actually pressure the government to go farther down the line once the propaganda takes a mind of its own. Let me give you an example. I don't believe that Mr. Biden was really all about, we're not going to take any oil from Russia. I don't believe that. Because I don't believe he wanted to reduce himself to begging Venezuela and the Saudis and then getting the stiff arm from the Saudis. Because the Saudis know, man, you're done, bro. Right? I don't believe that he wanted to do that. I believe what happened was he miscalculated how far the propaganda about how evil Russia is was going to go. I don't think he thought, yeah, people were going to start dumping vodka on the ground and all the rest of it. I don't think he thought about that. So my point is, the propaganda kind of metastasizes and takes on a life of its own. And then because the media ultimately is beholden to sponsors and capitalism, the more they see that that's taking off, the more then they then insert themselves and become the story and then cycle that pressure back to the government. And so they say, hey, man, you're not going to allow for this. You're not going to allow for this Russian oil. We won't even drink Russian vodka on the streets. You're not going to take any Russian oil. And of course, all these folks in the media, they're multimillionaires, so it's not going to affect them. It's going to affect you. It's not going to affect them. But Biden knows that he has to get votes, so it's going to affect him. So he was hemming and hawing, and then in came the Republicans who will willingly destroy the economy to fuck with Biden in the midterms. So you see how this crazy symbiosis, alignment, betrayal cycle happens between the media and the government. It is way more dangerous than Vladimir Putin. Dear listener, you know, we talked about this earlier where we said, oh, it's the image of the Ukrainian mother cradling a baby that gives us the strength to go on to demand these MiGs and all the other nonsense that escalates war. Of course, we don't know what happened. I just saw Max Blumenthal. Read a Max Blumenthal article where the Azov Battalion, our good friends over there in the Azov Battalion, were impeding civilian flight from Mariupol. Mariupol is all those civilian casualties. Impeding people running. Look, those people are such liars and they're so brutal, I don't believe anything. We saw the clip where the kindergarten teachers were arguing with the Ukrainian military about why are you putting the howitzers and why are you firing howitzers so close to my little kindergarten school? The Russians, are going to respond. Why isn't our media front paging that information? Well, the answer is very simple. Because if that school gets bombed, they don't want you to have a logical reason for why that would happen. They want you thinking in a certain direction. And they are aware of the power of YouTube and TikTok. As we covered yesterday, with the poor kids in TikTok, they will use soft propaganda. And then with thinking people like you who've already been through the Iraq war, they will use hard propaganda and delete you and demonetize you and destroy your economic livelihood if you make money as a YouTuber. You see how that works? That is way more dangerous than Vladimir Putin. Dear listener, I keep asking this question. Who has killed? Who has dropped more bodies in the last 20 years? Vladimir Putin or the United States? Do you know that we are the answer to that question? But here's the thing. We voted for Bush again after we saw what he did in Iraq. He got voted for twice. So did Mr. Obama. Mr. Obama ran out of bombs to kill other human beings, creating the image and likeness of God. He got reelected for doing that shit. And then when Mr. Trump started sending off rockets to Syria, that's when the liberal media finally admitted that he became the precedent for committing an act of war and killing. It is our media that is consistently promoting the Spartan culture because they benefit from it, because war always creates viewers and it also always creates fear. And so when you have these legacy stalwart media organization that your mother listened to and your mother's listened to, it's human nature that you're going to go to mommy and daddy, you're going to go to your parents You're not going to go to Jimmy Dore in his garage, but things have changed, dear listener, and that's why these people want to completely get you off of YouTube and back to watching regular legacy media. So, dear listener, you are more dangerous than Vladimir Putin if you're an American. Yup. I totally believe that, and I am not speaking hyperbolically. This company here has a higher GDP. The people who made this phone have a higher GDP than the entire nation of Russia. If you were an American, your military is the most powerful military that has ever been assembled in the history of human beings, and it is not even close. And you have the power, in a collective sense, as an individual, to influence what we do with that massive power, and Mr. Putin can't hold a candle to it. And the reason that I know that that is true is because of the way that the media and the government works to filter and curate your consciousness so as to get you to act in a certain way. Now they got that tennis player, unless he gives a pledge of non-allegiance and disavows Vladimir Putin, now they're going to take his livelihood away from him. You see what's happening? They know how powerful you are, and that is why they're trying to influence your consciousness this way. All right. There you are, dear listener. Do what you will with that, but I think it is the truth. Beware of these snakes in the media. They are horrible, horrible, unscrupulous people. And pretty much anything they say about this conflict is probably not the completion of the story. And it's probably designed to get you to think in a certain direction. All right. Having said that, dear listener, it is time for me to bid you beautiful people adieu. In the meantime, love your neighbor, take care of each other. Middle America, we are the media. Till next time, guys.